The chill of the dawn air was sharp, carrying the metallic tang of cold steel and the faint, clean scent of diesel. It was the smell of work. Inside my boathouse, the cavernous space amplified every sound, the gentle lap of water against the hull, the quiet hum of the diagnostic equipment warming up. This is my favorite time of day. Just me and my boat, the Observer 1. It's less of a boat, really, and more of a floating point solutions platform. A mobile lab I designed myself to inspect critical infrastructure, dams, bridges, underwater pipelines. This morning's job was a routine but vital check on the Northwood Dam, the massive wall of concrete holding back 1 billion gallons of water just 2 miles upstream. A community like this, full of pristine homes and manicured lawns, doesn't like to think about the immense pressure building just beyond the tree line. But I do. It's my job. This kind of thing happens. And if you've been watching Karenology for a while, you know it's never just about the boat. I was calibrating the multi-beam sonar when the heavy steel door of the boathouse flew open with a deafening bang. The sudden noise made me jump, my hand knocking against a wrench. It clattered to the deck. 3 figures stood silhouetted against the pale morning light. 2 were thick-set guys in generic black security uniforms. The one in the middle, the one who mattered, was Mr. Henderson. Let me set the scene for you. Henderson is the head of our homeowners association. He's a man who moves with the slick, calculated confidence of the insurance broker he used to be. He was dressed in a crisp, offensively white polo shirt and beige slacks, looking completely out of place in my world of grease and steel. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge like broken glass. He stepped forward, his expensive loafers crunching on some grit on the floor. "Your vessel is in violation of 5 separate community bylaws." He didn't look at me. He looked past me, at the Observer 1, with a look of profound disgust. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. I'm not a big woman, but I've learned to stand my ground. "It's not a vessel, Henderson. It's diagnostic equipment under contract with the county sheriff's department. We've been over this." He gave a small, dismissive smile. "Paperwork can be reevaluated. You have 2 options. Pay the $5,000 fine for noncompliance immediately, or this boat gets towed in 1 hour." He nodded to one of the security goons. "Start prepping the winch." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a warning, it was an ambush. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice dangerously low. "This equipment is scheduled to inspect the dam today. It's a matter of public safety." Henderson just chuckled. It was a dry, unpleasant sound. He tossed a thick folder onto the deck of my boat. Papers spilled out, a blizzard of bureaucratic nonsense. But something else fell with them. A small, heavy piece of brass, my old calibration key. It was from my first big project, the one that went wrong years ago, leaving a scar on my career. I kept it as a reminder that failure is always one miscalculation away. Seeing it skitter across the deck felt like a punch to the gut. I pulled out my phone. There are protocols for this. I had a direct line to the sheriff's department, my official contact for the dam project. But here's the thing about people like Henderson. They don't just break the rules, they twist them into a weapon. My contact, a desk sergeant named Miller, sounded tired. "Anna, I'm sorry, his hands are tied." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, keeping my voice down so Henderson couldn't hear. "I have a contract. This is official county business." "Not anymore, it's not," Miller sighed. "At least, not for the next 72 hours. Henderson filed an emergency notice with the County Safety Commission an hour ago. He cited Homeland Security protocols. Unknown, uncertified watercraft operating in close proximity to critical public infrastructure. He's painted your boat as a potential terrorist threat." The phone felt heavy in my hand. It was brilliant. It was evil. Have you ever been trapped by a rule that was never meant for you? By using the very regulations designed to protect people, he had turned my tool of safety into a weapon pointed right at me. For 3 days, my boat wasn't county equipment. It was a piece of evidence in a file, and every day it sat here, I was losing $10,000 in contract penalties. If you know what it feels like to be cornered, maybe hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. I lowered the phone, my mind racing, analyzing the new variables. This wasn't a simple fine. This was a tactical strike. I looked up at Henderson. He was watching me, that smug little smile playing on his lips. He knew he'd won this round. He knew he'd put me in an impossible position. He bent down, picked up my old brass key from the deck, and tossed it back to me. It felt cold in my palm, a symbol of a past failure, now a harbinger of a new one. "Oh, and Anna," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as he turned to leave. "This is just the beginning. I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who you are." He said it with such finality, a casual promise of destruction. "I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who you are." The two security guards exchanged a look and then began to unspool a heavy yellow chain, the links clinking with a grim sort of purpose as they prepared to lock down my boathouse. Henderson turned and walked away without a backward glance, his white polo shirt a receding speck of arrogance in the gray morning. I was left standing there, the cold brass of the old calibration key digging into my palm. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. There was nothing I could do but watch them chain the doors. The sound of the heavy padlock clicking shut echoed in the sudden silence. It felt like they were sealing a tomb. My tomb. I walked back to my small house, a modest place tucked away at the end of the lane, the kind of house the homeowners association tolerates but doesn't approve of. The engine of Henderson's luxury SUV purred as he drove past, and I felt a wave of pure, helpless anger. Inside, I poured myself a glass of water, my hand shaking slightly. It was barely 7 a.m. The legal trap was sprung, the financial penalties were ticking away, and now the public execution was about to begin. My phone, sitting on the kitchen counter, buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. A frantic, insistent rhythm. I knew exactly what it was. The Northwood Landing Community Message Board. The digital town square where gossip and judgment were passed around like canapes at a cocktail party. I opened the app. Henderson's post was at the very top, flagged as an urgent community safety alert. It was a masterpiece of corporate speak and veiled insinuation. He wrote about his deep concern over unvetted contractors operating near the dam. He mentioned my boat, the Observer 1, calling it an unregistered heavy-duty watercraft of unknown origin. He never called me a threat directly. He didn't have to. He just laid out the breadcrumbs and let the fearful minds of Northwood do the rest. And then came the masterstroke. At the bottom of his post was a link to a 5-year-old news article from a small paper in Colorado. The headline was stark: "Dam Scour Investigation Halted After Equipment Malfunction." My name was in the third paragraph. It was my first major project as lead engineer. A retaining wall had failed, not because of my work, but because of a faulty cement mixture from a supplier who later declared bankruptcy. But the investigation was messy, the client panicked, and I was the convenient scapegoat. It didn't ruin my career, but it left a permanent stain. It was the reason I started my own company, the reason I built the Observer 1 to be flawless. It was the reason I kept that damn brass key. I scrolled down to the comments, a sick feeling twisting in my stomach. The first was from a woman I sometimes saw at the local market. "This is terrifying. Why is she even allowed near the dam?" Another from a man whose lawn I complimented last week. "Does she even have the right certifications? Someone should check." The poison was spreading fast. Fear is a powerful motivator, especially in a town that sleeps in the shadow of a 50-year-old concrete behemoth. Have you ever had your past thrown in your face? That one mistake, that one moment you thought was buried, suddenly dug up and put on display for everyone to see. It feels like you're naked in a town square. The worst comment came from a woman named Sarah, someone I'd considered a friend. We'd shared coffee a few times. She just wrote, "I'm sure there are two sides to every story, but safety has to come first." That diplomatic non-statement was a sharper blade than all the other accusations. It was abandonment. In that moment, I was utterly, completely alone. My phone buzzed again, another notification of another neighbor piling on. I shut it off, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. I walked to the living room window, which looked out over the lake toward the dam. It stood there in the distance, a colossal curve of gray against the morning sky, impassive and silent. It was no longer just a structure of concrete and steel. It was my accuser. It was the focus of all their fear, and Henderson had just made me the face of it. The sun was rising, casting long, dark shadows across the water, and for the first time, I felt one of those shadows fall over me. The shadow Henderson cast was long and cold. For 2 days, I was a ghost in my own home. My boat was impounded in its own house. a monument to my powerlessness. The community message board was a wildfire of paranoia, and my name was the fuel. Every buzz of my phone felt like a small electric shock. I tried to find a way out, to find a lever I could pull, but Henderson was a master of his craft. He had built a perfect cage out of rules and fear. So I did what any engineer would do. I started looking for a flaw in the design. The logical next step was to find an ally, someone inside the system who understood the stakes. My first and only thought was Mark Jennings. He was a junior inspector for the county's Dam Safety Commission, young, ambitious, and the official liaison for my project. He knew my work. He knew the Observer 1 wasn't a threat. He'd been on it himself, marveling at the high-resolution sonar. I found him at a drab county office building that smelled of stale coffee and old paper. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a monitor, and when he saw me, his face went pale. He immediately stood up and hustled me into a small, windowless conference room. "Anna, you can't be here," he said, his voice a nervous whisper. He kept glancing at the door as if expecting Henderson to burst through it. "I need your help, Mark," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You know this is a sham. Henderson is using a security protocol to block a scheduled safety inspection. You have to tell the commission." Mark ran a hand through his already messy hair. He looked like a kid who'd been caught cheating on a test. "It's not that simple," he stammered. "Henderson has influence. He's on the board of a dozen local charities. He plays golf with the county commissioner. He presented them with a file on you an inch thick. That old Colorado incident, they're treating it like a pattern." I stared at him, my hope starting to curdle into something sour. It wasn't a pattern, it was a setup, and you know it. Are you going to let him get away with this? He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept staring at a spot on the beige wall. My boss told me to stay out of it. He said it's an internal homeowners association matter until the 72-hour review is complete. "Anna, I'm sorry. My hands are tied." His hands were tied. It was the same phrase Sergeant Miller had used. It was the universal anthem of the bureaucrat, the coward's lullaby. I felt a cold fury rise in me, but I knew blowing up at him would do no good. He was a dead end. Another door slammed shut. I left the county building feeling more isolated than ever. What do you do when the system designed to help you is the very thing holding you down? When every official channel is clogged with fear and politics? You go somewhere the rules are simpler. That evening, I ended up at the Rusty Anchor, the only real bar in Northwood. It's a place that smells of fried fish, spilled beer, and decades of quiet desperation. It's where the guys who actually build and fix things go, the plumbers, the electricians, the construction crews, the real world. I sat at the bar, nursing a beer, the low murmur of conversation, a welcome relief from the silence of my house. The bartender, a man named Frank, slid a bowl of pretzels toward me. Frank was a local legend. He was in his late 70s, with hands like gnarled oak roots and eyes that had seen the town grow from a sleepy fishing village into this polished, paranoid suburb. He'd been on the crew that built the Northwood Dam 50 years ago. He wiped down the bar with a damp cloth, his movements slow and deliberate. "Rough day, Anna?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I gave a short, bitter laugh. "You could say that. You seen the community page?" He grunted. "Trash. Always has been. Don't pay it no mind." He paused, then leaned in a little closer. "I heard what Henderson did, about your boat." I looked up, surprised. "News travels fast." "Faster than truth," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That man, Henderson, he always did have a nose for other people's money. He's been sniffing around that dam for months." He paused, polishing a glass until it shone. Then he said something that made the hairs on my arm stand up. "He always did get real friendly with the boys from North River Construction. Funny that. They're the ones who will sell you a rotten bolt for the price of gold." The name hit me like a physical blow. North River Construction. I knew that name. I had to. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, my heart starting to pound a new, faster rhythm. I wasn't just looking for an ally anymore. I was looking for a motive. The name, North River Construction, echoed in my head long after I left the bar. Frank's words had planted a seed of suspicion that was now growing at an alarming rate. It wasn't just a random comment. It was a connection, a loose thread in Henderson's perfectly woven narrative, and I was going to pull it. I was. Back in the quiet of my house, with the glow of my laptop screen pushing back the darkness, I started digging. My job isn't just about reading sonar scans. It's about seeing the patterns nobody else does, whether they're in riverbed geology or corporate paperwork. It didn't take me long to find what I was looking for. North River Construction had been the other bidder for the dam inspection contract. My bid, using the advanced technology on the Observer 1, was for $200,000. Theirs was a staggering $3 million. You see, my method is surgical. I use high-frequency sonar and thermal imaging to find specific points of stress or weakness. It's preventative. It's efficient. North River's approach was a sledgehammer. They proposed a full-scale coffer-damming operation, draining a section of the reservoir to do a visual inspection, a method that was 50 years out of date, disruptive, and ridiculously expensive. They didn't get the contract. I did. And now my boat was chained up, and Henderson was leading a crusade against me. It was all starting to make a terrible kind of sense. But the real gut punch came an hour later, deep in a database of corporate filings. I was tracing the ownership of North River and found it was a subsidiary of a larger holding company. And listed among the minority shareholders of that parent company, with a small but significant stake, was one Mr. Edward Henderson. Funny thing about small towns, isn't it? Everybody thinks they know everybody else's business, but the real secrets are always hidden in plain sight, buried in a public document nobody ever bothers to read. So, there it was, the motive. This wasn't about community bylaws or public safety. It was about a $3 million contract. If my inspection didn't happen, or if something were to suddenly appear wrong with the dam, the county would be forced to approve an emergency, no-bid contract. And guess who would be ready and waiting to save the day? The next 48 hours were a blur of frustration. The 72-hour review period ended with a formal notice. My boat was to remain impounded pending a full third-party safety review, a process that could take weeks. Henderson had won. The financial penalties were piling up, a mountain of debt I couldn't possibly pay. My professional reputation was in tatters. I felt like I was drowning. Then, one night, it happened. A high-pitched alarm sliced through the night air. It was the emergency warning siren from the dam, a series of short, sharp blasts that meant only one thing, a structural alert. I threw on a jacket and ran outside. Across the lake, a powerful spotlight was focused on the base of the dam. I grabbed a pair of high-powered binoculars from my workshop. Even from 2 miles away, I could see it. A dark, jagged line near the waterline. A crack. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. My last scan, just before Henderson locked down my boat, had shown the concrete was perfectly sound. A crack that size doesn't just appear overnight. It's not how concrete ages. It's not how physics works. Within the hour, my phone lit up with another urgent alert from Henderson. As I feared, he wrote, our community safety has been compromised. An initial inspection by my private security team has revealed a significant structural fissure in the Northwood Dam. This confirms our worst fears about the risks posed by unvetted operations. He was blaming me. He was actually using this to prove he was right all along. This was his endgame, a fake threat to push through a real contract. It was a lie, a dangerous multi-million-dollar lie. But how could I prove it? My equipment, the only thing that could show the truth, was under lock and key. Henderson had thought of everything. He had me completely and utterly cornered. And as I stood there, looking at the distant manufactured crisis, I had to admit something to myself. He had played this perfectly. It was a checkmate. Checkmate. The word hung in my mind, heavy and final. Henderson had created a crisis and framed me for it in one masterful stroke. The community message board exploded. The fear that had been simmering for days now boiled over into outright panic. I was no longer just a negligent contractor. I was the villain who had almost destroyed their town. My boat wasn't just a nuisance. It was Exhibit A in the case against me. In the court of public opinion, I was already convicted. The next morning, 2 sheriff's deputies showed up at my door. They didn't have handcuffs, but their presence was just as restraining. They served me with a temporary restraining order. I was legally barred from going within 500 feet of the dam. And then came the knockout blow. My boat, the Observer 1, was being officially impounded by the county as potential evidence in an ongoing investigation into property damage and public endangerment. They took my keys, My creation, my livelihood, my one tool to fight back, was now in the enemy's hands. Later that day, I got a call. It was Mark Jennings, the young inspector from the Safety Commission. His voice was strained. "Anna, I had to sign off on the preliminary report." "What report?" I asked, my voice flat. "The emergency assessment. It confirms a critical failure. It recommends immediate remediation by a qualified contractor." He paused. "They gave the contract to North River. No bid, $3 million. "Of course they did. And you signed it?" "I had no choice," he said. And for the first time, I heard a crack in his voice, a sliver of genuine regret. They had photos, expert statements. The pressure was immense. "But Anna, something's not right." He lowered his voice. "I'm sending you a copy of the report. Look at the spectrography data on page 11. Just look at it. I have to go." He hung up. A few minutes later, an email arrived. It was the report, a slick 20-page document full of technical jargon and terrifying projections. It looked official. It looked convincing. But I went straight to page 11, the spectrography analysis of the fissure. It was supposed to show the chemical composition of the damaged concrete, but the readings were wrong. They were off the charts for certain polymers, materials you'd never find in 50-year-old concrete. It was a chemical signature I'd seen before. It wasn't the signature of a crack. It was the signature of an industrial-grade epoxy gel. He had faked it. Henderson hadn't found a crack. He'd made one. A cosmetic flaw, expertly applied, designed to look like a catastrophe on a grainy security camera. And Mark knew it. He couldn't say it, but he had given me the clue. It was a desperate, quiet act of rebellion from a man trapped in the same system as me. It was a lifeline. Have you ever been so low that the smallest act of decency from someone feels like a miracle? But what could I do with this information? It was one expert's word against a signed official report. I needed more. I needed proof that was undeniable. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That night, I broke the law. The restraining order was a piece of paper. The truth was a physical thing. I put on dark clothes, grabbed a pair of night vision goggles, and a high-powered thermal camera from my workshop. This was insane. This was career suicide. But they had left me with no other choice. I didn't go by the road. I went through the woods, moving silently through the trees that bordered the lake, the scent of pine and damp earth thick in the air. I made my way to a rocky outcrop on the opposite side of the reservoir, about a quarter-mile from the dam. It was a dangerous, slippery climb in the dark, but it gave me a clear, unobstructed view. I raised the thermal camera. My heart was pounding in my chest. If they caught me here, I was finished. Through the lens, the world turned into a shifting landscape of hot and cold. The water was a cool, dark blue. The concrete of the dam was a slightly warmer shade. I focused on the spot where the spotlight had been, where the fake crack was. And there it was, a true crack, a real structural failure, would release heat from the friction and water seepage. It would glow on a thermal camera, but the spot I was looking at was cold. It was the same temperature as the rest of the dam's surface. A dead, cold, painted-on lie. I had him. I had the proof. Now, I just had to figure out how to use it without getting myself thrown in jail. I had the proof. The image was burned into my memory, a cold, dead lie on the face of the dam. But a picture on a thermal camera, taken in violation of a restraining order, wasn't a silver bullet. It was just another piece of data a clever lawyer could tear apart. Henderson had built his case on official documents and public fear. I couldn't fight him on his turf. I had to change the game. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The fake crack, the epoxy gel signature Mark had flagged, the $3 million contract. The only person who could corroborate my theory, besides a terrified junior inspector, was the one who knew the dam better than anyone, Frank. The next morning, I was at the Rusty Anchor before it even opened. Frank was inside, wiping down tables, the familiar smell of stale beer and bleach in the air. I laid the thermal image printout on the bar. I explained everything, the spectrography report, the epoxy, the cold signature of the crack. He stared at the image for a long time, his brow furrowed. He tapped a thick finger on the picture. "I've seen this before," he rumbled. "Not here. Years ago. A company tried to pull a fast one on a bridge repair contract up north. painted on some rust, claimed the whole thing needed replacing. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp. It's an old grifter's trick, but proving it, that's the hard part. They'll just say your camera is faulty. They'll say you faked the data. I know, I said. That's why I can't be the one to present it. It has to be undeniable. It has to be public. An idea began to form, a wild, audacious plan born of desperation. It was a huge risk, but my other options were bankruptcy and a possible jail sentence. I had nothing left to lose. Frank, I said, my voice low, when is the next county budget hearing? He thought for a moment. Tomorrow morning. They're ramming through the emergency funding for North River. Henderson is scheduled to give the keynote presentation. He's the hero of the hour. Perfect, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. He wants a stage, I'll give him one. The plan required two things I didn't have, access and an audience. Frank helped with the second. He spent the rest of the day on the phone, calling every local reporter, every stringer, every blogger he knew. He didn't tell them the whole story. He just told them that a local taxpayer had uncovered some disturbing irregularities in the Northwood Dam contract and was going to present her findings at the hearing. He framed it as a classic David versus Goliath story. Reporters love those. Getting access was trickier. I couldn't get my boat, but I still had friends, contacts I'd made over years of working with fire departments and emergency services. I made a call to a fire chief in a neighboring county, a man I'd once helped locate a submerged vehicle in a frozen lake. I didn't ask for permission. I just told him I needed to borrow a piece of equipment for a public safety demonstration. A portable, high-pressure water cannon, the kind they use for crowd control or blasting through debris. The morning of the budget hearing, the room was packed. It was a sterile, official space, but it felt like a Roman arena. Henderson was at the podium, basking in the glow of the projector screen. He was in the middle of his presentation, showing dramatic, zoomed-in photos of the crack, his voice resonating with false gravity. The county commissioners were nodding along, their faces a mixture of concern and gratitude. I saw Mark in the front row, looking pale and sick. I slipped into the back of the room, unseen. Frank was there, giving me a subtle nod. The local news crews he'd called were setting up their cameras. Henderson hadn't noticed them yet. He was too busy playing the savior. He finished his speech with a flourish. And that is why I urge this commission to approve the $3 million in emergency funding for North River construction, for the safety of our homes, our families, our very way of life. There was a smattering of applause. The chairman of the commission picked up his gavel. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. If there are no further questions, that was my cue. I have a question, I said, my voice ringing out in the suddenly quiet room. I started walking down the aisle. Every head turned. Henderson's face went from triumph to shock, then to pure fury. Miss Reed, the chairman said, his voice laced with disapproval, you are not on the agenda, and I believe you are under a court order to ". I'm here as a taxpayer, I interrupted, my voice calm and clear, and I have evidence that this commission is about to be defrauded of $3 million. I was at the front now, standing just a few feet from the podium. I was breaking the restraining order in front of a dozen witnesses and 3 news cameras. There was no going back now. What's the boldest thing you've ever done when your back was against the wall? Tell me in the comments, because this was my moment. A shocked silence fell over the room. The cameras swung towards me. Henderson's face was a mask of disbelief and rage. He looked like a man watching his perfect crime unravel in real time. The commission chairman, a portly man named Davies, banged his gavel. Miss Reed, this is highly irregular. You are out of order. Fraud is irregular, Mr. Chairman, I said, my gaze locked on Henderson. I held up a single USB drive. I have my own presentation. Before anyone could stop me, I walked to the podium, pulled Henderson's laptop towards me, and plugged in the drive. 2 images flashed onto the large screen behind me, side by side. On the left was the high-resolution sonar scan from the Observer 1, taken the day before it was impounded. It showed the dam's surface as a smooth, unbroken wall of gray. This is the Northwood Dam, 1 week ago, I announced, structurally perfect. On the right was the thermal image I'd taken from the woods, a landscape of cool blues, with a crack showing as a dead, cold line. And this, I said, is a thermal image of that same spot, taken 2 nights ago. A real crack under immense pressure, would generate heat from friction and water seepage. It would glow white hot on this screen. But, as you can see, it's cold. It's as cold as the lie it represents. A murmur went through the crowd. Henderson sputtered, "This is preposterous! Her equipment is faulty! She took this illegally!" "My equipment is state-of-the-art," I shot back, "but you don't have to take my word for it." This was the moment, the point of no return. I nodded towards the main entrance. The doors swung open, and 2 firefighters from the neighboring county wheeled in the high-pressure water cannon. It looked like a small piece of artillery. "What is the meaning of this?" Chairman Davies boomed, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "It's called a live test," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound confidence. "The report Mr. Jennings was forced to sign mentioned an epoxy gel, a very specific fast-setting polymer. It's strong, but it has one weakness. It's water-soluble before it fully cures. It can be washed away." I turned to the room, to the cameras, to the stunned faces of my neighbors. "I propose a simple demonstration. Let's point that cannon at Mr. Henderson's $3 million crack. If it's real, nothing will happen. But if it's a lie..." I didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood. It was a brilliant, simple, and undeniable test. Henderson was trapped. If he objected, he'd look guilty. If he agreed, his entire scheme would be washed away. He lunged for the microphone. "This is insane. You can't allow this. It could damage the dam further." But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. Frank stood up from his seat in the back. "I helped build that dam," his voice boomed. "A little water ain't gonna hurt it. Let's see the truth." Cries of, "Let her do it!" and "Show us!" erupted from the public seating area. The tide had turned. The commission had no choice. They reluctantly agreed. We all marched out to the dam, the commissioners, the reporters, Henderson, and me. It was a bizarre parade. The firefighters aimed the cannon. The whole town, it seemed, was watching. "You wanted to tow my boat, Henderson," I said to him, my voice low enough so only he could hear. "You wanted to make sure everyone in this town knew who I am." I gave him a cold smile. "Well, you got your wish." The cannon roared to life. A powerful, concentrated jet of water slammed into the side of the dam, right onto the dark, jagged line. For a second, nothing happened. My heart skipped a beat, and then it began to dissolve. The gray epoxy gel started to streak, then run, washing away in murky streams down the concrete face. In less than a minute, the crack was gone, vanished, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, clean, and unbroken surface. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The lie had been literally washed away. The cameras were all on Henderson now, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure defeat. He knew it was over. His scam, his reputation, his future, all gone, down the drain with some cheap epoxy. The aftermath was swift. North River Construction was investigated for fraud. Henderson was forced to resign from the Homeowners Association and every other board he sat on, facing a barrage of lawsuits. My boat was released, the restraining order was dropped, and the county issued a formal apology. I won, but victory came at a price. The dam inspection contract was reinstated, but my relationship with the county officials was strained. I was no longer just an engineer. I was a troublemaker, a disruptor, someone who couldn't be controlled. I'd won the battle, but I knew the war against mediocrity and corruption was a long one, and I'd be fighting it alone. A few days later, I was back in my boathouse, prepping the Observer 1. The familiar scent of diesel and steel was no longer just the smell of work. It was the smell of freedom. I picked up the old brass calibration key, the one that had once symbolized my greatest failure. I looked at it, glinting in the light. It wasn't a reminder of a mistake anymore. It was a reminder that you can't measure the truth with a faulty instrument. I walked to the control panel, inserted the key into its slot, and turned it. The sonar hummed to life with a satisfying click. It was time to get back to work.